There is a way this works, and there is a way it doesn't. The first way is a private conversation, a quiet word through the right office, a deal made over lunch that nobody ever has to see. The second way is walking through the wrong door at 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. Laura Lopes walked through the wrong door, and the woman who was standing 4 feet away, the one who has been counting the whole time, did not make a sound for the first 30 seconds because she wanted to hear the entire thing in public. That is where the camera was. That is where the story is. Westminster, Royal Horticultural Halls, a charity showcase for rural development. Trestle tables, handwritten labels, a man from Cumbria with a display of seed potatoes. This is not the place for an ambush. But an ambush does not announce itself. It arrives through a side entrance, on a name added to a restricted list at the last minute, and it delivers a sentence that makes the entire room stop talking at once. Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, crossed that floor and delivered a grievance about estate money and private family arrangements to the Princess of Wales, in front of the press. And she spent the next 7 days watching a professional institution take her apart piece by piece, while the person who could have stopped it, her own mother, signed the paperwork and closed the door. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. Because this story is not about one afternoon in a hall. It is about how the monarchy protects itself from the people inside it, and what happens when the quiet one in the corner finally decides to speak. Laura Lopes is not a public figure. She was born in January 1978, the second child of Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles. She has 3 children, a husband who runs a minor estate in Devon, and a career in the art world. She shows up in the court circular perhaps twice a year. Her brother, Tom, is more visible. Her mother is the queen. Laura, however, is the one who has spent her adult life building a normal existence within the orbit of a family that is anything but normal. She opened a fashion boutique, Mojo and McCoy, in Hungerford a few years back. It was stocked with high-end brands. It closed in late 2023, the victim of difficult retail conditions. Her mother, the queen, was a fan of its designer labels. By all accounts, Laura is not a schemer. She is not a player in the palace game. She is a daughter who saw her mother's family being sidelined and walked into a hall to make a point about it. The point she made was a disaster. At around 2:15, Laura came through a side entrance. Nobody in the hall was expecting her because she wasn't on the working list for the afternoon session. She came through the crowd without stopping, which is the part that tells you she knew exactly where she was going. She waited for a gap in the conversation in front of Catherine's stand. She got one. No curtsy, no greeting, no dropping of the voice, which is what everybody does in a room with a glass roof because the acoustics carry a whisper 20 feet. For separate people were close enough to hear it. She told the Princess of Wales that the recent changes to the estate funding had been a deliberate insult to her family, and that everybody involved knew exactly what they were doing. She said it to Catherine. Now, that is not an outburst. An outburst happens in a corridor. It is a brief, explosive moment. That gets contained quickly. What happened in that hall was a delivery. The woman had to walk through security, locate the right person at the right event, and speak clearly enough for the people nearby to hear. She did not accidentally say something. She intended to be heard, and she intended to be seen. Catherine did not answer her. She has not answered a thing in 14 years. She took half a step back, kept her face still, and looked at the woman in front of her the way you look at a person who has done something they cannot take back. The man from Cumbria was still holding a potato, and then 4 feet to the left, and turned around. She did not turn straight away, which is the detail every witness has mentioned. She adjusted her gloves first. One, then the other. She stood completely still for about 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a very long time in a room with 200 people. Long enough for the conversation at the far end to die out on its own. Long enough for a broadcast operator to swing a camera around without being told. Someone has said you could hear the rain hitting the glass roof. And I believe it, because that is exactly what a hall like that sounds like when everybody in it stops talking at the same moment. Then, and turned and faced the woman. No anger in it. That is the thing people find hard to believe, and it is the thing that made it work. Her expression did not change at all. She did not answer the accusation. She asked in a perfectly ordinary voice whether the security team had checked the guest list for the afternoon session. That was the whole reply. Not a word about funding. Not a word about the family. One question to the room about whether that person was supposed to be standing there at all. She did not argue. She queried her right to be in the building. And that is the point at which Laura Lopes made her second mistake, which was much larger than the first. She should have gone. She should have smiled, apologized for the intrusion, and walked out through the side door. By the next morning, it would have been a paragraph. Instead, she stepped closer. She told the Princess Royal that she was hiding behind outdated protocol. She said the financial audit currently running across the estates was being driven deliberately to damage her family. She said that everybody in that palace knew about the private meetings that had been taking place with the Prince of Wales. That last sentence carried across the polished floor to the back of the hall, which is where the reporters were standing. 3 of them went for their notebooks at the same time. There is a reason an audit makes people uncomfortable. A royal estate audit is a line-by-line reconciliation of what an estate spent against what it was authorized to spend, running back years. It catches 2 things: money that went out with no paperwork behind it, and people who were being paid for work nobody can produce evidence of. The consequence is the part that matters. An audit does not accuse anybody of anything. It produces a list of items that require an explanation. Then it becomes somebody's job to explain them. Laura Lopes had just told an entire room full of reporters that she knew the audit was coming and that she had an opinion about it, and did not raise her voice at any point. She lifted one hand about 6 inches, which is the signal her protection officer has been reading for 30 years. The man came through the crowd without hurrying and asked Laura to step out to the lobby. He told her that her presence at the event was no longer appropriate. The entire thing from the first sentence to the doors ran under 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And it took a fortnight of institutional machinery to deal with, because here is what everybody in that room understood by the time they got to their cars. That was not a family argument that happened to occur in public. That was a family argument staged in public in front of a photographer who was booked at an event where the 2 most protected women in that institution were standing 8 feet apart, in the exact week that an audit was moving into the part where somebody would have to start explaining things. A freelance photographer had been standing at the back of the hall on the diagonal, the only position from which you could see the faces of 2 people standing at the 3rd stand along. He had been there since the doors opened. Hey, photographer does not get that lucky. A photographer gets told. The first question that went round the corridors of that palace was not about the words at all. It was how she got in. Security at the front of that building was tight. Accredited list, printed badges, a checkpoint staffed by people who turn away peers of the realm without blinking if the name is not on the sheet. Staff went to the access logs that evening and found what they were looking for in about 11 minutes. A VIP invitation had been issued locally, not by the palace, not by the household. It came from the regional director of the organization hosting the showcase, a quiet man in his 60s with a distant social acquaintance with Camilla's family going back years. He had been asked as a favor to add one more name to the restricted list by hand. He was suspended before nightfall. In the middle of all of that, on a conference call somewhere else entirely, the Prince of Wales was told what had happened. He ended the call mid-sentence. The people on the other end of it have described that as the single most out-of-character thing he has done in public life. He doesn't do that. He is the most procedurally polite person in that institution, a man who thanks a room before he leaves it even when the room has wasted an hour of his time. He put the phone down, told his chief of staff to get the raw, unedited footage from the freelance, and made it clear that the price did not matter. Not the pictures that had already gone out. The raw card. Everything before and after the frames that were going to run. He was not handling a public relations problem. A man handling a PR problem asks for the published images and a line to give the press. A man who asks for the unedited card is building a file. He watched it in his office with the lights off. He watched a woman cross a hall toward his wife. He watched the crowd react. He watched the exact moment his aunt turned around. And when it finished, he did not say anything for a while. Then he picked up the secure line to his father. He did not ask permission. That is the part that matters, and everybody in both households noticed it. He briefed the king on what had happened, on how she had got in, and on what it was going to look like in the morning papers. Then he told him that he was taking the disciplinary process himself. The king listened. He did not argue. He told his son to do whatever was necessary to protect the institution. Now, a man in his late 70s, unwell, married to a woman whose daughter had walked into a public engagement and gone at his son's wife, handed his son the authority to deal with it, and stayed out of the room. He did not defend anybody. He did not ask for time. He knew exactly what he had been handed, and he handed it straight on. William went into the basement briefing room at 5 minutes without taking his coat off. 5 senior aides were already sitting there, each with a folder in front of them containing a version of the day written from whichever direction they had watched it. He walked to the middle of the mahogany table, put his phone down on it hard enough to be heard, and picked up the remote. He played the raw footage on the wall. Nobody said a word while it ran. The shudder is audible on the raw audio, which is the detail that finished the argument before anybody made it. The sound of a professional camera firing at 8 frames a second in a silent hall filled that briefing room for about 40 seconds. He turned the projector off. Then he asked the only question he had come there to ask: how a woman who had been kept off the working list for the better part of a year had walked into a secured hall containing 2 working royals. He looked at the director of security while he asked it. The man began an explanation. William stopped him about 6 words in and said he did not want an explanation. He wanted a name. He wanted the person who had made it possible identified in that room that evening, and he wanted them out of their post, off the premises, and reminded in writing of what they had signed before the first edition landed. And this is where it stops being about one afternoon in Westminster, because that is not how a man behaves about a security lapse at a flower show. He had spent the previous 2 months quietly working through the households, moving people out of positions, closing off the informal channels that have run through that building for 20 years. Everybody senior in that palace knew it was happening, and most of them had decided to keep their heads down until it was finished. That afternoon told him it was not finished. Whatever he had been clearing out still had a hand on a door. One of the aides tried to place the blame at a distance. The invitation had come from a regional branch, an outside organization, not the household. William asked him whether that branch had been briefed on the standing arrangements regarding Camilla's family. The aide nodded, because it had. He asked why the briefing had been ignored. The man moved in his chair and said there had been pressure from above. William asked for a name, and the room went quiet. Then he reached for a folder that had been sitting on the table since before he came in. Red tag, restricted circulation, and a title on the front that tells you more about the state of that institution than anything else in this story. Internal influences. Somebody in that building keeps a list of the informal relationships that cut across the official structure. Marriages, old jobs, cousins, a junior manager in one office related to a senior assistant in another. It is not a scandal document. Every large organization has a version of it. In that one, it exists because the official chart has never once described how anything gets done. It took him under a minute to find the connection, a mid-level manager in the palace. Administration, married to a personal assistant working inside Camilla's household. He closed the folder, looked at the director of security, and said one sentence. Within 20 minutes, the man was walking out through the back gates with 2 officers beside him, carrying nothing, past people he had worked with for 11 years. The message went round that building faster than any memo has ever traveled in it. The Prince of Wales had stopped being the heir who would deal with all of this. Eventually, he was dealing with it now, while all of that was happening in a basement in London and was sitting in the back of a car. She did not use her phone. She did not speak to her aide. She sat with her hands folded on her bag and looked straight ahead through most of the drive. She was not upset in any way that showed. She was going back through it. The timing of the entry, the gap in the conversation the woman had waited for, the exact wording she had used, and the order she had used it in, the position of the cameras when it started. Protocol is not manners to that woman. Protocol is the load-bearing wall of the entire building. Every rule about who stands where and who is on which list exists because 200 years ago, somebody worked out that the only thing separating a monarchy from a permanent argument is a written order of precedence that nobody is allowed to improvise around. She finally spoke. It was to ask about the regional director who had issued the invitation. Not about Laura, not about her mother, about the man at the door. Security starts at the front entrance, she said. That was the entire comment. Now, there is a question underneath all of this that took me 2 days to work out, and could have stopped that confrontation in about 4 seconds. She has a protection officer standing 8 feet away at all times. She has 50 years of authority. One raised hand at the first sentence, and that woman is in the lobby before the second one leaves her mouth. And nobody in the press pool gets more than a blurred frame and a rumor. She let it run. She stood there and let a woman say 3 full sentences in front of 24 reporters and only moved when the last of them was out. I don't think she froze. I don't think she was gathering herself. I think she wanted to hear the whole thing in public, with witnesses and a recording running, because a grievance shouted in a corridor is deniable. A grievance delivered in front of the national press is evidence of a state of mind. She let the woman finish building the case against herself. Then, in the car, she asked her aide for the attendance list, not the accredited press list. The full attendance list for the afternoon session, the one that includes local guests and organizational invitations. Printed out on the way back, because the aide had it on a tablet. There were 3 names on it that she recognized immediately. 3 regional journalists, none of them from the main royal pool. All 3 of them with a long and friendly relationship with people around Camilla's family. And all 3 of them standing in a hall in Westminster on a Tuesday afternoon for a rural development showcase that would normally be covered by one wire photographer and a stringer. That is the moment it stopped being an incident. 3 friendly journalists. 1 freelance on the diagonal with a long lens. 1 name added to a restricted list by hand at the last minute. And a woman who walked in through a side door and went directly to the 3rd stand-alone. None of that is temper. All of it is a schedule, and had been the target of the thing that produced it for months. She had blocked 2 attempts to change the management rules on estate properties. She had insisted on a full audit rather than the light review that had been proposed. Every time somebody in that orbit had tried to loosen a rule about how the land is run and who benefits from it, the same woman had been standing in the corridor with the original documents in her hand. People who spend years trying to move a wall eventually decide to move the person leaning against it instead. By the time the car reached London, she had moved on to the part that mattered most. And this is the part nobody has reported anywhere. The audit was confidential, not discreet. Confidential in the specific institutional sense, which means the number of people who knew it existed was 4, and she could name all 4 of them. A woman had walked into a public hall that afternoon and referred to it out loud in front of reporters. Somebody had told that family it was coming. She sat in the back of that car and worked through the timeline. Who had known what, and on which day? And she came out of it with an answer she did not like at all, which is that the most likely route ran through her brother's own office. She made 1 telephone call before she got out of the car. An old contact. A person she has known for decades from a world that does not appear in any court circular. The request was narrow and specific. A trace on the encrypted correspondence relating to the audit. Not the contents. The routing. She wanted to know which building the information had left from. The car came into the courtyard at about 6:45. She noticed the light on in her nephew's office on the way past. She did not go up. He was doing his half, and she was doing hers. Neither of them needed a meeting to work out that they were pulling on the same thread from opposite ends. She went to her own desk and opened the estate management file. She spent the rest of that evening doing the least dramatic thing anybody does in this entire story, checking signatures. Not for money, for names, sign-offs on appointments, recommendations, and the people who made them. Junior positions in estate offices filled across 4 years by people whose route into the job ran back through the same handful of relationships. By about 11 o'clock, she was looking at a pattern. The pattern was not a series of favors. It was a slow, patient, entirely legal placement of staff into the parts of an institution that decide how land is run and who gets paid for running it. Not a title, not a house, not an invitation to a Christmas lunch. The machinery itself. That is the point at which the Princess Royal decided to stop blocking things and start collecting them. William's people found their own piece of it 2 days later. And theirs was uglier. A pattern of encrypted calls between Camilla's mobile and a commercial law firm in the city. Not a family solicitor. Not the household's usual people. A firm that does one thing. Defending large amounts of money when somebody official starts asking questions about it. The dates lined up with the audit, not after it became public. They lined up week by week from the point the reconciliation moved into the part that produces a list of items requiring an explanation. He asked his legal advisor whether there was any route to freezing the accounts under review before the firm could get in front of it. The advisor was honest with him, which is more than most people in that building manage. It would be very difficult. The money was not sitting in an account with a name on it. It was inside a structure of trusts and holding arrangements that the palace has no authority over whatsoever. Unpicking that takes years. In a court, William stood in front of the wall map of the estate properties currently under review and gave one instruction: every land title on that board to be checked for charges, debts, and encumbrances that nobody in the household had approved. Nobody in the room asked why. They all knew why. A property with a charge on it that nobody authorized is a property somebody has borrowed against. And that is the one thing in this entire story that would have been impossible to explain away. Then he told his team what the next 48 hours looked like. Total containment. Nothing to the press, on the record, or off it. No briefing, no steer, no friendly word to a correspondent at a drinks thing. Anybody who spoke to a journalist about any part of it, including privately, including in a way they thought was harmless, would be dealt with under the agreement they had signed on the day they took the job. He was not protecting the story from the public. He had a folder to finish, and he needed 2 days. He rang his father a second time. This call was shorter than the first. He told the king that the situation at the hall was contained, that the disciplinary work inside the household was nearly complete, and that he needed one thing signed: a formal instruction removing Camilla's family from every part of the institution's business. Not a public statement. An internal decree, dated, sealed, distributed to every household office that has ever issued an invitation or processed a payment. The king agreed. He had watched the footage by then. Everybody around him has said the same thing about that afternoon. The disrespect landed on him harder than the money ever did. He had spent 20 years asking that institution to accept his wife's family. He had been given exactly one thing in return, which was the expectation that they would behave. Now, I promised you at the start that I would tell you what and did. And this is the part of it that nobody has reported. Her brother had a version of that page in front of him 3 days before the Monday, and he had not signed it. He had asked for a few days. He had asked whether it needed to go quite that far. He had done what he has done at every difficult moment of his adult life, which is look for the version of the decision that hurts the fewest people in the room he is standing in. On the Friday evening, his sister came to see him on her own. Everybody who knows both of them says the same thing about what happened in that room. It is the only moment in this entire story where that woman's control came off. She put one hand flat on the table. She did not raise her voice, because she has never raised her voice in her life. But she said one sentence to the King of the United Kingdom about what had been done in a public hall in Westminster to a woman who has spent the last 2 years getting herself back onto her feet in front of the entire country. She talked about what it meant, that a family had chosen that woman, at that event, on that week, to make a point about money. Everybody in that corridor heard the tone, even without the words. That is the fury. It lasted about 4 seconds. It is the reason a page got signed on Monday morning instead of sitting in a drawer until the autumn. She has not mentioned it since to anybody. There is a thread running under all of this that goes back a long way. It is the reason a woman in her 70s went at her own brother over a photograph of somebody else's wife. And watch what this family did to Diana. She watched a young woman get managed, briefed against, corrected, arranged around, and quietly reduced by people who were perfectly polite about all of it. She watched what it cost. She said almost nothing at the time because she is not built to say things at the time. She has spent the 29 years since making absolutely certain that she is standing in the corridor when it starts again. Catherine stood in a hall in Westminster in June and had a woman walk up to her in front of 24 reporters. The person who moved was the one who has seen it before. The decree went out to Camilla's country house by messenger on the Monday afternoon. Everybody in that building expected a telephone call. A furious one, probably. Or at least a request for a meeting, a lawyer's letter, an argument about process, something. The afternoon went by. Nothing. The king's phone stayed silent all day. There is a version of that afternoon that would have made a very good photograph. A furious woman at a door. A raised voice. A car leaving at speed. Every part of that would have cost her something. She has known it since 1997, when she watched a country decide what it thought of her from about 4 pictures and never fully change its mind afterwards. The messenger came back with an empty envelope and one line to report. She had signed the receipt without a word and closed the door. Somebody left a comment under one of my videos a while ago that has stayed with me since. It belongs here more than anywhere I have ever put it. They wrote that in that family, The dangerous ones are never the ones who shout. They are the ones who accept things immediately. I read that at the time and thought it was a nice line. Then I watched a woman sign for her own family's removal from an institution without asking a single question, and I stopped thinking it was a nice line. That is not surrender. A woman who intends to fight asks for a meeting. A woman who intends to argue instructs a solicitor. A woman who signs a receipt and shuts a door has already worked out that there is nothing available in the next 6 months, and she has moved her thinking somewhere further out. 8:39 o'clock. The aftermath. William stood at a window in that palace on the Monday evening looking down into a courtyard. By every account of that day, he did not look like a man who had won anything. He had the outcome. He had the signature, the removals, the closed accounts, the empty offices. He had 2 months of work finished in 9 days because somebody made the single worst tactical decision available to them in a hall full of cameras. The other side of the board had gone quiet, which is the one thing you never want from a player who has been in that game for 30 years. Tell me below what you make of that silence, because I have gone round and round on it, and I still cannot decide whether it was defeat or preparation. And if you want the rest of these, subscribe, because the audit list has not finished being explained to anybody yet. Laura Lopes walked into that hall to defend her mother. She was the only person in the entire story who paid for it out of her own life. The boxes, the bank letter, the 4 million comments, all of it landed on the daughter. And her mother, who has spent 20 years knowing exactly which telephone call stops exactly which thing, made none of them. She signed for the envelope without a word and went back inside her own house to protect the only position in this family that has ever really mattered to her, which is her own.